Hi, I'm Quinn and I'm autistic. Welcome to Autistic. Not long ago, I talked about common misconceptions around PDA, pathological demand avoidance, and the problems misconceptions such as those can lead to. It felt important for me to say something about the damage being done before I told the other side of the PDA story. What it means to actually be demand avoidant. Describing the internal workings of PDA fairly and concisely is no easy task, as evidenced by the difficulty in finding reliable, unbiased information on the subject. It's out there, but you have to dig deep to find it, beneath pages of simplified descriptions condensed from contested clinical conclusions based on flawed interpretations and conflicts of interest about something that even the people who live with it find really difficult to fully comprehend, let alone describe. The penetration of PDA as a concept is no different to most other characteristics that have been rightfully or wrongfully linked to autistic minds. Last time, I wanted to give a flavour of the common sense understanding of PDA and show how it doesn't bear up to scrutiny when other interpretations are allowed into the mix. How things that might look like demand avoidance are often something else, including a lot of behaviours that are common in autistic people. Things like asking questions and wanting to set clear, unambiguous boundaries and goals. Behaviours like these usually only delay us from acting on a demand and could be addressed with a little understanding and patience, but they can still lie at the root of misunderstandings that raise the avoidance flag. Then there's things that might actually prevent us from carrying out the demand. Moral quandaries, sensory issues, and the need to be meticulously accurate and truthful are typical autistic blockages. None of those are in any way pathological, though. They're quite transparent and reflect genuine, relatable reasons to pause for thought. So we could describe these as rational demand avoidance. It's important I make the distinction, because whilst it's very common for the label to be misunderstood or applied inappropriately, the PDA phenomenon is quite real, even if it might not be what some people think. I've ummed and ahed a lot about how to do this follow-up video. I considered the diagnostic checklist approach. 10 signs you have PDA. Something more aligned with self-help. 5 ways to beat PDA and get things done. Or the sensationalist clickbaity version. You won't believe what PDA really is. But I think the best way is just to tell it from the heart. From my point of view, PDA isn't just one thing. A number of distinct factors that impact my life in different ways and can all be discussed separately when viewed together in a specific context constitute my PDA profile. This is my personal perspective. At the centre of my experience of PDA, at its deepest core, is a feeling. Numerous behaviours have been categorised as indicative of PDA by scientists engaged in endless debate and theory over what they might mean. But what lies behind all of those observations? Behind the communication barriers and the misunderstandings, the pleading and the tears, the begging, the joking, the platitudes, the dismissal, the fawning, the anger, the frustration and the meltdowns. What starts it all off in me is nothing more than a simple biochemical reaction, an emotion. Feelings are complicated things. The English language alone contains thousands of words to describe the subtle nuances of emotion, all of which have derivative adjectives and adverbs and have been applied in hyperbole and aphorism for centuries. Even then, we still have to borrow words from other languages for the ones we missed, like schadenfreude and ennui. At any given time, our emotional soup is a thick, simmering broth of conflicting needs and contradictions. No single feeling exists in isolation, and even familiar emotions come in many flavours. Take pride. Pride in our own achievements feels quite distinct from the pride we feel for those of our children, or of our country, the county swimming team, or Simon in the office who just won Employee of the Month. Our feelings are the vanguard of our decision-making processes. Before our conscious minds have even processed incoming sensory data into a meaningful thought, our emotions are already at work, influencing our responses. It's rare we respond to complex situations on emotions alone, but when we do, we think of it as instinctive, a gut reaction. Now, this is the point in an in-person presentation where a chap leans back in his chair, clasps his hands across his chest and clears his throat. We all have to do things we don't want to, pal. If we all said no to things we don't like, then nothing would get done and we'd all starve. He's starting to get the point, but he's looking in the wrong direction. He's eyed the lay of the course and picked up that PDA starts with a feeling, but he's staked his bet on the wrong emotional horse. He's envisioning a feeling based on the desirability or difficulty of a task, which, whilst it's a pretty commonplace conclusion, hence the previous video on this topic, is also overly simplistic and just a little bit judgmental. The feeling at the heart of PDA is rarely related to the desirability of the task at hand. In fact, in my case, it wouldn't even cross my mind. It could be the most laborious and unpleasant job you could think of, or something we've looked forward to and worked towards for years, and we could still face the same emotional dilemma. Bubbling away in the PDA emotional soup are creamy streaks of self-preservation and self-esteem, swirling around chunks of social respect, social scoring and social disconnection, seasoned with fear, spiced with failure, and simmered in a rich stock of anxiety in a cast-iron pot marked obligation. Whether you experience PDA or not, you're likely no stranger to the feeling at the heart of it, or at least something very similar. Obligation is a necessary fact of life, and essential to the functioning of society. But how we respond to each individual commitment can be difficult to predict. The context of an obligation isn't just determined by its magnitude. The nature of the task, the people it obliges us to, our competence, confidence, and any reward or consequence all factor into our perception. Everybody responds to obligation differently, and with or without PDA, those responses are entirely framed by personal, momentary context. The context is unique not only to you, but to each individual obligation and moment in time. As a general rule, the more we feel obliged to do something, the less keen we are to do it. But even that's not a constant. Even the most pressing and binding of obligations seem less intimidating if we enjoy the task, we like the person we're doing it for, or we desire its rewards. Obligation does strange things to people too. The financial affairs of the filthy rich, for example, are a fascinating exploration of the lengths people will go to avoid obligation. Millions paid to charities, philanthropic foundations and high-profile social engineering projects which step on the toes of governments, or wasted on valuable works of art left to languish unappreciated in bank vaults, not just to save money, but to avoid the obligation of tax. They pay even more millions to lobby politicians who themselves hide fortunes in shell companies registered in tiny tropical islands they've never been to, whilst their wealthy spouses claim not to even live in the same country, all to avoid obligation. To cheat the very system they preside over. I have a PDA profile, and my fear of obligation, of dealing with social debt, can paralyse me. It can stop me dead in my tracks and prevent me from doing the most elementary of tasks. Before I started to understand it and moderate its impact on my life, PDA could escalate any situation into a mega confrontation in the blink of an eye. As a child, I was ill-equipped to process those feelings. My immature, alexithemic mind, unable to connect directly with traumatic emotion, could only process it in caveman terms. Demand, make pain. Stop demand, stop pain. All I could say with confidence back then is that sometimes obligation of any kind could trigger overwhelming anxiety and leave me feeling utterly suffocated by the pressure. I didn't know what it was about certain demands that triggered that compelling need to escape or evade. I just knew how difficult and painful it was to choke it down. I also learned very young that voicing my fears to others could lead to even worse consequences. I felt trapped, helpless, and alone in my struggles, with a phenomenon that was decades away from even having a name. It took me years to stitch all the details together, to painstakingly trace the paths of thought, sensation, and memory to make sense of it. It was in my 30s that I stopped just fighting my PDA and started understanding it, because somebody came into my life who cared enough to help me build a safe space, free of PDA triggers, so I had room to gather my thoughts. PDA makes me feel compelled, duty-bound almost, to anticipate everything, every possibility and contingency all the time. If someone has to ask me to do something, then it feels like I've already failed. And I've never stopped feeling that way. Despite the understanding I have now, the PDA feelings are still there, as vivid and as uncomfortable as they ever were. I'm just better equipped now. Think of it like paying bills. Every obligation is a bill that needs to be paid in social currency. The currency of obligation is more than just an exchange of labour. You scratch my back and I'll scratch yours is just the start of it. It permeates all our relationships and the very fabric of our society. Obligation is more volatile than traditional economic commodities, though, and can go from blue chip stock to toxic asset in a flash. Warning, emotional investments may go up as well as down. The social capital of faith and trust markets can fluctuate and any return on your investment is not guaranteed. Always invest your emotions wisely. My PDA is a pressing need for all my social bills to be paid in advance, so nobody ever has to ask me for payment. I try to manage all my commitments in as proactive and hassle-free a way as possible, like the social equivalent of paying my utilities by direct debit. Instead of receiving bills in the form of requests, I want all my obligation bills sorted out before I know they're due. And I've no interest in credit of any sort either. No emotional loans, no entitlement hire purchase or credit cards of favour. The less I have to deal with social currency, the happier I am. If I ever have to ask you for a favour, which I'll avoid just as fervently, I'll hope that I've already had so much social credit stacked up that I've never cashed in. You'll be sure to be there for me when I need you. When somebody makes a request of me, or reminds me of something, nudges me, gives me a hint, or generally points me in the direction of a task, it feels like they've just pointed out an unpaid debt on those social accounts. And it triggers in me a response of fear, of shame, and of guilt. It's not that I don't recognise that the task needs doing, or even that I don't want to do it. It's the fact that I can no longer prevent you from asking that causes a disruption. The you scratch my back viewpoint may suggest that I've got it upside down. When you do something for someone, they're the one with the obligation to you, they'll tell me, and I have no argument with that. What they can't see is that I don't want anyone to feel obliged. All I want is a nice clean set of accounts where all my social bills are settled. I don't want anyone indebted to me any more than I want to be indebted to them, because it messes up my social accounting. It's not that I'm afraid of owing you a favour. The whole idea of anyone owing anybody anything puts me in a spin. When I was a kid, I'd use all sorts of tricks to try to eliminate the obligation. I'd beg and plead, distract and deviate, bargain and cajole. I'd follow people around, barraging them with verbal missiles, hoping they would withdraw inside their obligation bunkers and take their demands with them. Or I'd formulate complicated pseudo-scientific arguments, claim support from invisible allies, or quote the half-remembered, barely relevant musings of philosophers. When none of those worked, there was nothing left but to stomp and grumble, fawn and grovel, cry, sniff, snort, flail, and eventually shut down. Any onlooker would think I was a spoiled brat whining and wheedling their way out of a task they didn't want to do, because that's the obvious answer, isn't it? The Occam's razor solution. If it walks and talks like a spoiled, lazy, petulant monster of a child, it probably is one. If anyone had listened to me, or maybe if I'd been better at telling them, they might have recognised that I was actually perfectly happy to do the task. The scene could have been avoided. Provided we had a time machine. An accurate one. So I could step into the time vortex and go back to a point in time shortly before you asked and get the job done then. So when I get back to this moment again, there'd be nothing for you to ask me to do, and my social accounts would be intact. Even the most resourceful of us can't keep up a spotless social balance sheet indefinitely. Keeping it squeaky clean requires anticipating everything, and that's just not possible. We have to learn to be easier on ourselves for not predicting the unpredictable, but they're not the worst demands. The ones that really hurt for me are the ones I know I should have done, but didn't. No matter how subtle your hint, how kind your words, how diplomatic your demeanour, if I feel like I should have known something needed doing before you asked me, your request is like a rubber stamp of failure coming down on my forehead with the force of a sledgehammer. I'm stood in the town square in my birthday suit while the whole town points at me and laughs. I'm on stage at the Albert Hall and I've forgotten my lines. My cousin's biker gang have just rolled up in the drive. The kangaroo that escaped from the zoo is tearing up the backyard. There's a squirrel in the Christmas tree and the vicar's due round for afternoon tea. Now! Forgetting things, or maybe more accurately, failing to get round to doing things I really should do, is something many autistic people are familiar with. Problems with executive functioning, a crossed wire in our task ignition system that can mean our get up and go spends most of its time got up and gone, can be a problem that aggravates or triggers PDA feelings. I'll talk about it in greater depth on another occasion, but for now, think of an executive functioning misfire as a steep hill that takes will, determination and a favourable wind to conquer, and stands in the way of us initiating any task. In general, tasks are graded on their difficulty, cost, time required and so on, but when our executive functioning withdraws its cooperation, a hill emerges from the depths to obscure the view. All we're registering is a hill with a task hidden behind it. When more and more tasks become hidden behind hills, the hills are all we can see. Instead of a small task, an achievable task and a complex task to choose from, there's just 3 equally tall executive function peaks to leg it over before we can even see them. Even regular, everyday tasks can feel unachievable, because every hill feels as daunting as the last. Our executive function can do a Lord Lucan any time it wants, and in relation to any or every task, depending on the conditions, including things we want to do or have to do, like get out of bed, comb our hair, or put our cereal into a bowl before we eat it. Sensory or motor difficulties can aggravate PDA feelings when they slow us down or impair our skills, or make environments harder to navigate or function in. ADHD can interrupt our concentration and make planning, routines and task management both hard to initiate and harder to maintain, shortening the fuse on the PDA time bomb. PDA feelings can come into play when the interoceptive differences many of us experience mean we're unaware of our need for essentials like eating, sleeping and basic self-care until it's too late. And even if we've registered the need, monotropism might see us so hyper-focused in a different direction that we forget our obligations to ourselves. Oh no, I just said it. Obligations to ourselves. Why didn't I have to say that? Haven't I learned? I called everyday tasks like eating and self-care obligations. Now, if they're obligations, that means forgetting them is just as much of a failure as being asked to do something. So I've messed up my balance sheet again. Now I owe myself a debt. So if I could travel back in time and prevent the obligation, I'd have no reason to travel back in time later. So I couldn't be there to prevent the debt. It's a paradox, isn't it? I've taught myself into both resisting my own needs by turning them into obligations and a temporal paradox. Will people stop asking me to do things? And that includes you! Me! As I said earlier, PDA starts with a feeling. For me, it's a pervasive fear of obligation on either side. In terms of social accounting, I'm in the neither a beggar nor borrower be camp. I don't want to owe you anything, nor for you to owe me. It doesn't mean I'll be unwilling to do anything that might put you in my social debt, because I don't intend to collect on it. I've no plans for a reckoning when I'll call in all those favours you never returned. If I get to the point where I feel taken advantage of, I'll most likely drift away from you or cut you off, not hold you to account. A few years ago, Tomlin Wilding proposed an alternative name for PDA, which conveniently retained the acronym, but, in my opinion, offers a more representative, accurate picture of what it really is. They suggested pervasive drive for autonomy as an alternative, and I think it works pretty well. It certainly does a better job than the incumbent candidate. The compulsion to keep those social balance sheets clear, that need for choice over obligation and visceral fear of social debt, whoever might hold it, comes down to a need to decide my own future. Autonomy is that most human of motivators, the desire to determine our own fate. It's the will to be free. That's not to say that PDA isn't a complete pain in the butt, or that it's a rational, useful trait to live with. The feelings behind PDA are not completely rational, and don't think we don't know it. As children, we don't know that though, and learning to survive in a transactional world, despite an aversion to obligation, even to ourselves, isn't easy without good support and help. Our whole world is transactional, not just in terms of goods and services, but most of our relationships. We trade in social economies not just of labour, but of loyalty, goodwill and mutuality of purpose. Any hindrance to fully engaging with those economies is going to make life harder, and PDA certainly does that. All my life, I've battled with the urge to avoid tasks, not because I'm unwilling to do them, but because some irritating part of myself that doesn't quite connect with the same reality as my conscious mind, the PDA demon on my shoulder, keeps telling me that if I stall for long enough, they'll stop asking. Then forget they asked in the first place, leaving me free to do the task off my own back instead. And that's more important than any consequences of not doing it now. These days, when people order me, ask me or hint at me to do something, I've learned to handle it a lot better. It's always been easier to keep my PDA imp quiet when in the company of people I can rely on and who understand the distress the PDA feeling can cause me. They know they can not only spare me the indignity and cognitive dissonance of wrangling PDA feelings, they can save themselves the hassle of negotiating with me by being gentle in their requests and keeping conditions or deadlines which might aggravate my demand anxiety to a minimum. For my part, I've more or less silenced the demon on my shoulder when I'm around them by reassuring myself there's no evidence they're keeping social accounts of their own. If they're not keeping count, then there's no need for me to, so my PDA can rest for a while. Outside of those safety zones, there's been a lot of gritting of teeth and biting of tongues. I haven't always concealed my discomfort very well, and there's been plenty of nasty scenes because of it. I've shed tears, melted down, shut down, been manhandled and punched because of it, but I've survived it one way or another. I'd rather not have to battle with PDA feelings in the first place, because it is that, a battle. One that's made infinitely harder by the aggressively simplistic attitudes of employers, educators and even medical professionals who've recently picked up on it, not to mention by its bloody awful name. The PDA feeling made school a struggle from start to finish and employment a suffocating ordeal. If I managed to keep my accounts free of workplace obligations for any length of time by consistently staying ahead, my workload always increases soon after. No busybody manager could ever keep up with the effort I've put in to ensure my need for tidy social accounting doesn't lead to expectations beyond my ability, while simultaneously suppressing the urge to scream and run away to find someone who can build me a time machine.
Great Scott!
It's a combination of the PDA feeling and executive functioning troubles that makes completing many everyday tasks way more of a chore than they ever should be, and caused far too many missed deadlines and broken promises. My autistic veracity, alexithymia, flat affect and the double empathy problem have all mixed in with PDA feeling to start off a fair chunk of all the arguments, misunderstandings and embarrassments that have served as hard life lessons for me. If there's an element to my personal PDA passenger that could be thought of as pathological, something like a behavioural addiction, then it would not be an addiction to saying no, like I portrayed in the simplistic view I explored last time. It would be an addiction to keeping social accounts and finding myself lacking whenever I fail to anticipate a need or act on it in time because my executive functioning, ADHD, sensory anxiety, emotional dissonance, short-term memory glitches, monotropic focus, social anxiety, communication quirks, autistic attuned theory of mind or some other quirk of my nature stopped me or slowed me down so much someone had to actually ask me to do something. That doesn't trip off the tongue quite so easily though. In my efforts to erase my failures from history, the child I used to be caused way more pain than necessary, both to himself and the people he cared about, because he was terrified of being smothered by social and emotional debt. I haven't talked about where I think the PDA feeling might come from today, nor why it seems, at least so far, to be most noticeable in autistic people. I've also not gone into any detail about how I've learned to live with it beyond the benefit of having a safe space. That's for another video. This time, I've tried to give a very personal picture of why I consider PDA to have been a significant factor in the course of my life so far. If you experience PDA, your feelings and the traits they interact with won't be exactly the same as mine, but it's unlikely we'll be too far apart. Your PDA feeling might not involve guilt, failure and shame like mine does, but it will be no less unpleasant nor less of a mountain to climb. Maybe even more so. If you're the parent of a PDA kid, then my experiences won't map onto theirs neatly, but there will be pointers here that may help you move forward. Living with PDA is a lot easier when we have people in our lives who can relate to us without the perception of social accounts. When we have an oasis to return to, a space free of obligation, it allows us to catch our breath, ready for the next battle against PDA back in the outside world. I'm not sure I'd have got through the last 20 years or so if I hadn't met my wife. It's thanks to her that I now have a strong safety zone, a haven of calm and mutual support that allows me to recharge the hefty batteries I need to get through another day of dealing with the outside world through a fog of misunderstandings, communication failures, empathy dead zones, and of course, PDA. Without that buffer, I'd not have had the luxury of time to think, or the emotional support I needed to put together the notes and observations of a lifetime and identify the deep-rooted feelings buried beneath the sometimes overwhelming anxiety of my PDA. In my case, I came to realise that every time something makes me feel a sense of obligation, I feel like I've already failed. I know that I have to overcome those feelings to function in our transactional world, but if you know me and care to do so, you could also spare me some of the effort. The genesis of PDA, for me, was fear of failing the people I care about. Getting to the point where I can put that into meaningful words took decades of soul-searching, study, learning from mistakes, experimentation, and a few too many catastrophes. I don't want the youngsters of today to have to go through that alone like I did. If someone in my life had looked beyond the easy interpretations and taken the time to help me work out why demands cause me so much distress before I learned the hard way, I might not have been burned and broken so many times. But back then, in the 70s and 80s, nobody knew to ask. But you do now. Thank you for watching. Hello again. I just wanted to say a few quick words at the end to acknowledge that this second video on PDA has taken a long time to finish. Life throws us curveballs sometimes, and it feels like I've been fielding more than my fair share of them over the last year or two, some of which I'll be talking about in a video soon. I'd like to say a huge thank you to my patrons and to all the people who've stuck by me in the channel through these challenging times. And I'd like to welcome the thousands of viewers and new subscribers who've joined the ride whilst I've been away. There's plenty of new content in production right now, so don't waste any time in hitting that subscribe button if you haven't already. And I'll see you here again soon.